I've asked Father Paul Lundberg to get us started in prayer tonight.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. O heavenly King, comforter, the Spirit of truth, who are in all places and fill all things, the treasury of good things and the giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O good one. O Christ our God, may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable in your sight. Guide us into all wisdom and give us the grace to do all things for your glory. Amen.
Amen. As I said, I'm Holly Benton. I'm the Executive Director for the Orthodox Christian Leadership Initiative. We have been a new organization getting started around this time 3 years ago, and I've been with the organization as the Executive Director for just 2 years. I'm so thrilled to have with us tonight Father Paul Lundberg. He serves at the Annunciation Greek Orthodox Church in Montgomery, Alabama. And he owns and operates his own coaching practice out of suburban Atlanta, Georgia. He also has periodic reflections from coaching that he posts both on his website and on LinkedIn through Alaxis Partners. So good to have you with us here tonight, Father Paul Lundberg. Deacon Sean Reed is the owner and operator of Arrowhead Coaching and Facilitation Solutions, which is just outside of Hamilton, Ontario. He provides coaching and consulting solutions in the areas of leadership development, operational planning, and leadership communication. He was also really involved with our organization a couple of years ago when we got started with our first program called Doulos, the Intensive Program in Servant Leadership. So thanks so much for your curriculum design and for all that you do. Deacon Sean also serves at a mission in Ontario. So it's so great to have you be a part of this. And finally, I'd like to welcome Dean Harbory. He is the board chairman of our organization, Orthodox Christian Leadership Initiative. He also works full-time as the chief operating officer at Brightworth. And he is a professional certified coach as well. And he's had a long history working professionally as a coach. So I'm so thrilled to have them all here today to provide this informational session to all of us here. We had about 25 people registered to come, and I'll say it's a pretty even mix. I don't know if you remember answering the question about whether you were a professional certified coach, if you were in the middle of being trained and certified as a coach, if you were actually maybe contemplating being trained as a coach and maybe, adding that practice to your livelihood or something in addition to the work that you're already doing, or if you're a total novice and what is this coaching thing and how might coaching be beneficial to Orthodox Christians and leadership development within the church. So we really have a mixed group here tonight, and I'm so thrilled you've all joined us. For those of you who have come in just the last minute or two, you probably realize that we're recording. And I'd like to just say once again that if anybody at any time during the discussion and the Q&A period, if you have a question and you would rather keep it private, just let me know and I'll pause the recording. With that, I'd like to turn things over to Dean.
Thank you so much, Holly. And thank you everybody for coming tonight. We had this deep desire just to connect with other people who are either interested in coaching or are Orthodox coaches or, has, any interest in learning more about what we're doing at OCLI with coaching. So I just want to thank you for taking the time tonight to be with us. And as we get started, I'd like to ask a question that maybe, one or two of you could answer. You can just speak at will if you like, but when you think of a forum like this tonight, where we're talking about the whole idea of professional coaching and how that applies, how that works out in the Orthodox Church, what would your expectations be? What are you hoping to receive from our time together tonight? If I could get maybe two or three of you just to articulate what that would be.
I'll jump in. This is Mike Connor. I think I'm just wanting to find out more. My parish priest invited me to explore this several months ago, Father Barnabas Powell. And so I'm a coach, very much in business coaching. He's like, Mike, I think you need to check this out. So I'm wanting to explore and see what is happening.
Okay.
I'm also a master certified coach, and I do leadership coaching. And also Father Timothy from the St. Catherine's, the Greek Orthodox Church in Arizona, he was telling me about this and about this great initiative. And he thought that, you know, you would benefit from my experience, because I work with the corporate mostly on leadership development. I do team coaching as well. I do mentor coaching for coaches who want to certify to become credentialed from the International Coaching Federation, because I'm also an assessor with the International Coaching Federation for coaches. So I'm wanted to know more how I can contribute and support you.
Okay, fabulous. Anybody else want to weigh in?
I wanted to learn more about the intersection of the Orthodox conception of the gospel in the practice of coaching, in contrast to all the other spiritualities out there, because in the industry, there's a lot of prosperity gospel, name it and claim it type of directions of things that get really integrated with the idea of coaching itself, and how to separate those out and focus on what is true to orthodoxy.
Okay, beautiful. Love that. Those are all great observations and great questions. And so I think I love the idea of, really discussing coaching around ICF, the International Coach Federation process for coaching. So I myself am a PCC. I've been a coach since 2003. And so when we came to the OCLI, realized that this could be a really good way to help serve the church. So I'm going to do just bring up a presentation here real quick, and we're going to cover a few ideas and concepts. And then as advertised, we're going to engage in a panel discussion. Okay. So just to introduce the idea, if you haven't read up much on OCLI, this would help you to understand our mission statement, which is it exists to nurture and empower Orthodox Christian servant leadership. And there's something really unique about that, because to be a servant leader in today's world, it's just a little outside of the norm of what you experience in broader culture. And so when we look at the principles of servant leadership, and of course, Jesus himself being the great example of servant leadership, part of the mission and vision of OCLI is to help inculcate that more so into individual lives and into parishes, and just to be a service arm to the church in helping develop servant leadership. And, I can see how important that is for me. I'm a president of a parish council in our church, and we have, I think, one of the greatest congregations ever, but I can still see where we would all benefit by focusing on the leadership style of Jesus and what those principles are like, at the parish level. One other thing here is like, well, why do we have this Orthodox Coaching Network, something that we're launching through OCLI? And this is one thing I've realized over the years, that coaching is an extremely powerful platform for human change. And it's a way to address, parish needs and principles and process, that are demonstrated in the scriptures. And when I say that, this isn't to try and supplant any of the other disciplines. And we'll talk about some of those other disciplines in a minute. This isn't meant to be a replacement for anything, but it's just a way of relating to people and a way of providing service to individuals and to teams that I think are really valuable. And when I say that, the most powerful, a very powerful platform for human change, I'm always reminded of, I like to go back to Genesis, for example, when God was in the garden and Adam and Eve had sinned. And what I found so interesting was that, in that setting, when God came to Adam and Eve, I mean, what he really did was ask questions, Adam, where are you? Adam, what have you done? Who told you you were naked? And I always mused with that thought, thinking like, well, did God not know where Adam was or what he had done? And of course he did. But what was the purpose of those questions? And what is it about asking humans questions like that at a time like that in a non-judgmental way to get them to self-identify and to display their thinking and to use that as an element to cultivate healing and change. So the whole idea, again, behind the Orthodox Coaching Network that we've started is to try and provide some of that discipline, if you will, to the Orthodox community. And because we have a number of coaches on the call tonight, we're all familiar with these types of acrostics where, hey, what's the difference between counseling, mentoring, consulting, and coaching? And really, they're very different disciplines. And, and I think it's really good that, that we can bring this discipline into the church and to support the church. The differences here is that oftentimes with counseling, mentoring, consulting, it's just a very different paradigm where it's just more directive in nature. And coaching is non-directive in nature in the sense that we're always operating off of the client's agenda. We're never judging the client in any way, as the other disciplines also do, but it's just a different way of approaching a human being and helping them to dig deep in their own thinking. So oftentimes in coaching, we talk about helping a client to think it, to feel it, and to say it before a coach would have to. So it is very non-directive. And of course, some people would ask at a time like that, well, then what benefit could it derive if you're not, in a sense, being somewhat directive? But it is a process, as we'll talk about in a minute, that helps people really discover what they're thinking and what their insights and judgment are internally, and just to help them in their forward movement and in their decision-making. Whenever I'm teaching a coaching class, I've been on faculty with a couple of coach training schools in my past. I always liked asking the question like, well, whose thinking do you like best? And of course, everybody answers my own, right? And so some of the genius behind coaching is that we get to use the client's thinking and the client's judgment and insight in whatever concern or problem or whatever goal that they're trying to achieve. So again, coaching isn't intended to replace any of these other disciplines at all. It's just a way of adding to the mix and providing another tool in the tool belt to really help both the laity as well as the clergy in their pursuit of whatever their goals are. And so some may ask the question, well, what's the difference between an Orthodox coach versus any other coach? Right. And my point is, I think that Orthodox coaches have the wherewithal to be some of the most powerful coaches on the planet. And why would I say that? It's not because of who we are as individuals, but it's because of the faith that we espouse. And we all know that, the Orthodox Church, being the ancient church and all that comes with it, that we just have a plethora of principles and process and insights into humanity that maybe some of the other philosophies and modern day religions wouldn't have. And so I think it's really important for Orthodox coaches to be employed not only within our church, but in our world. So it's good to hear that we have business coaches and team coaches. I know in my coaching practice that I've had since 2003, up until I took a job with Brightworth as the chief operating officer, part of my thing was like, well, because Orthodox principles work so well with human beings and human life, it's like, how can we take some of these principles into the workplace and use some of these Orthodox principles for human relationships, for conflict management, just all around to help people grow and develop as human beings out in the world. And I will tell you this, I hadn't planned on saying this, but one of the reasons why I stepped out of my coaching business to be the chief operating officer for this company that I work for is because they wanted that. They said, hey, let's build a culture built on the principles that you're talking about, and let's use this as an illustration of what a company can do in the modern world. And so we have a very strong culture. We call it the middle way, right? We've used the middle way concept that whether it was St. John Chrysostom or St. Gregory of Nyssa or St. Gregory of Palamas or any of the great saints of the past would always talk about middle way. And so we had tried to operationalize that in a business setting to help people do well in their human relationships. So my point is the significance of Orthodox coaches is huge, because we're connected to God in such a way that we have maybe a better chance at being healing agents in the life of people because of the principles that we espouse. Okay, in this next slide, I often run into this in the Orthodox Church. It's like, well, what's the difference between coaching and confession? Is this encroaching on some of that? And what does that look like? So I thought maybe we could have Father Paul speak to that issue. So Father Paul.
Thank you, Dean. Yes, this is a great question. And Dean, as we sort of dive into this question, you had a beautiful slide, a couple of slides back, where you had that matrix laid out of the different professional services ranging from counseling to coaching. Could you bring that back up for us in just momentarily? So if the best way I can think about the difference between coaching and confession is to look at that fourth row, area of concentration. And while coaching is focusing on next steps, probably the simplest way to describe what confession focuses on is repentance. It's forgiveness, it's cleansing, it's receiving the grace of God. And so one of the biggest differences I find between coaching and confession has in many ways to do with people's expectations, because I think a lot of people come to something like confession expecting an overlay of one of these other things on top of confession. So they'll come to confession looking also for advice. They'll come to confession looking for guidance. When really, if I think about confession in a very pure way, the point of it, the purpose of confession is simply to come to confess our sins in the presence of God and receive the cleansing, forgiveness, and grace of God in response. And so the agent is God, and God's grace is in the room in a way that it's not with these other kinds of services and other kinds of conversations. That's not to say that God's not there and his grace is not there, of course. It's just not there in the same way. So I hope that that's a good, very succinct and maybe a start to that conversation about the difference between coaching and confession. But my understanding of a baseline confession is I come, I confess my sins, the priest says the prayer, and I leave. And the priest doesn't have to say a single other word to me. If he doesn't have a word to share with me, then he doesn't share a word with me. He just says the prayer for me. Of course, depending on the competency of the confessor and what the confessor is able to do, he might be able to add other things. He might be able to add some counseling on top of that, or some coaching on top of that. But I don't see that being as what, the essence of confession is all about. My spiritual director once said that confession has nothing to do with getting better, which is a very startling thought to some of us who may have these expectations of confession. But I think I'll stop right there, Dean, and turn it back over to you, and we can take this conversation up later, depending on people's thoughts about it.
Thank you, Father Paul. Really appreciate that. So in the end, it's like, why coaching now? Why would we bring this to the forefront? And in my business, when people say, well, why do I need a coach? I may be leading well, things are going well. Why would I need a coach? And I always like that question, because my answer was, well, find me one professional athlete that doesn't have a coach, right? So coaching doesn't imply that there's some big stated need necessarily, but it is really a way to move farther, faster. And particularly when we live in a complex culture with very complex issues, I think it creates complexities in our parishes as well. And we were talking, before we formally started here tonight, about the impact of COVID, for example, on parish life. And I reflected on how I had a conversation recently with my priest, and we were saying like, hey, we're going to encounter different psychology in people that we've probably never experienced before. So it's almost as though we have to be ready for something that we know not of. In other words, it's the unexpected. And so we realize that coaches are great sounding boards whenever an organizational professional, organizational leader, whether it's laity or clergy, whatever the concerns are, coaches really focus on being that sounding board and engaging with questions. So I know we have a number of coaches with us here tonight, but I thought it'd be fair to read the coaching definition from the International Coach Federation, which they say, coaching is to partner with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. And really, you can look at that in a number of ways. Oftentimes for us to maximize our potential, it may be gaining a new skill or getting better at leadership or management, or as an Orthodox Christian, growing in virtue. Okay, so there are many ways in which this can be expressed, but again, I find this to be a very powerful medium for human change. If you look at some of the characteristics of professional coaching, and again, a number of people here that have gone through coach training or been certified as a coach, you would understand this, but I thought it was fair just to repeat it again. Point number one, right? The client drives the agenda. So a coach doesn't drive an agenda or come with an agenda. They're always to, in a sense, take the female role in the dance, right? Where we're trying to follow along with where our clients are and step in the direction wherever they're headed. Point number two, the coach's role is to ask discovery-based questions to help the client think out loud. And I've seen this time and time again, that when you ask a person a deliberate question and they have to verbalize it and articulate it using their thinking, it just creates a lot of clarity in their own thinking. I was coaching somebody not long ago who had a very difficult meeting that they were about to go to, and just being able to ask the question, well, what is it, if you could say anything unfiltered, what is it you would like to say to this group of people? And of course, this person had a list of things like, I'd tell them this and I'd tell them that. And then it was like, okay, take those thoughts and convert them to discovery-based questions yourself as you go into this meeting, and you'll have a much better outcome. So it's things like that. And again, I just love the garden scene where God is asking Adam and Eve questions to help them to get to self-identify. And in the end, we know, as we read a little bit further in Genesis, chapter 3, that, God continued to parent them, right? He made clothes for them and helped them. But he started that whole process of self-awareness and maybe, really fostering confession or whatever from his perspective in that setting. Okay, so the coach does not direct the client. There's no prescriptive advice. We don't tell people what to do. I remember working with an organizational leader who didn't know what coaching was, but in my bottom, the thing that sold him on coaching, I said, I'm never going to tell you what to do. And he was the response was like, good, because I don't want you telling me what to do. But when you help them discover it for themselves, it's really a very good thing. So the coach provides a safe space for clients to process. That's why coaches never judge people. That's what I like about the coaching profession. Whether they realize it or not, they've taken on some orthodox principles, because we're taught as coaches, don't judge anybody. And so if nothing else, going through coach training helped me to improve a little bit in that arena. On the right there, we see the coach does not replace or compete with any ordained office in the church, nor any other professional discipline. Every one of the disciplines that we've talked about, whether it's counselor, mentor, consultant, confessor, all of those have their role, and coaching doesn't tread on any of that territory. And so I think it's really important to understand. Point below that, as I already mentioned, the coach is always for the client and never judges. That doesn't mean that coaches don't give feedback, because if there is an area where a person is living against their beliefs or their values, the coach is always taught to say what is so. That's what we learn in coach training school, but to do it in a way that doesn't create a make wrong or a judgment for the client. So coaching helps a client to move farther, faster, and that's essentially, what's behind that process. So here, if the reason, people come to a forum like this is because you're seeking to be coached. Just understand it's for clergy and parishioners alike. It can be anything from leadership to vocational issues, Orthodox culture, deep or difficult people and situations, conflict management, emotional intelligence, effective parish council. It doesn't matter. A coach is accustomed to taking any agenda item that a person may bring to the table and coach around that. And the glory behind that is that coaches don't have to be an expert in any of those fields necessarily, as long as they know the right kinds of questions to ask. I think what I'm trying to communicate with that column of ideas there is that, you know, leadership applies to all of these areas, and servant leadership particularly. Without having the grounding and a mindset of a servant leader, we're probably not going to be as effective in any of these areas. So that's why we focus on servant leadership. If you are a coach, right, we know that coaching is a profession, right? What does it mean that coaching is a profession? It means that if you just do what comes natural, you're probably not going to do it right. If I were wanting to be a tennis pro and I decided to go out and not hire a tennis coach and just swing the racket the way I thought I should, chances are I'm going to really miss the mark there, because I'm not going to have the coaching on the proper techniques or the form or whatever. So coaching is a profession. It requires professional skills. And when we're talking about professional skills, essentially this is what it is. We have to go against normal human nature to do the right thing. I've always liked using the illustration of a surgeon, right? So a surgeon has to deviate from normal human behavior to do what he does, simply because, at least when I grew up, my mom used to say, don't poke people with sharp objects. So, you know, to be a professional means that we need to go against the grain of normal human behavior to do the professional and disciplined thing. So what we're looking for at OCLI, for those coaches that may want to join us at some point in time in our Orthodox Coaching Network, is that we do like people to have applicable certifications, had some level of coach training, because it is a profession, and that they're very strong in the coaching competencies. And the International Coach Federation does a great job of describing what those competencies are. But in the end, we'd really like to develop an emerging Orthodox network of coaches, if for nothing else, to strengthen each other in this profession as we go out into our culture and into our world, to be a reflection of Christ's presence in the people around us. Okay, so what we're going to do now, and I'm going to go off the presentation here in just a second, we're going to have a panel discussion, and the panel itself includes the three of us, Deacon Sean Reed, Father Paul Lundberg, and myself. And you've already heard a little bit about us, but what you didn't hear in Holly's introduction was what brought us to coaching in the first place. So I'm going to start that process of the panel discussion by asking our coaches a question. And maybe I can start with Father Paul Lundberg and just say, Father Paul, what was your journey that brought you to this whole coaching arena?
Thank you, Dean. It's fun to talk about this in your presence, because you were such a big part of this journey for me. And I have to say, with gratitude to God, that Dean is my mentor coach and was a big part of my of guiding me into this field. So I'm very grateful to God for Dean, for the relationship that we have, and all the support that he's given me. So my journey to coaching, I suppose, like so many of our other journeys, started with crisis, and it started with the experience of a personal crisis in my life. And I was really shaken by that and really stirred up by that. And I was, at that point, I was considering even, stepping away from the priesthood. And I thought to myself, what in the world could I do outside of the priesthood that is, related closely to what I do in the context of parish ministry. And I discovered this thing called coaching. And the more I learned about it, the more interested I got in it. And so I started to pursue the training and the education. And as you can see, I'm still a priest. I haven't abandoned my ordained calling. But it was a tremendous blessing for me to be able to take action toward educating myself and developing myself as a coach, because it addressed so many of the issues that I was facing at that time during that moment of personal crisis. So I'll stop right there, and I can say more later if people are interested. But that's kind of how I came to it, and I am very, very grateful that I did. It'll be something that'll be with me for the rest of my life, and something that I continue to enjoy, and I think is helpful to a lot of people.
Thank you, Father Paul. And you labeled me a mentor coach, but I think maybe tormentor coach would be a better description of that process. But I have to tell you, Father Paul is a true professional when it comes to coaching. Deacon Sean, what was your journey? What did that look like?
Thanks, Dean. Hi, everyone. So for as long as I can remember, in both my work and even my family life growing up, I have been about one thing, which is basically to help leaders lead. I began my career actually as a communications advisor in politics, working for a senior Canadian politician. I was in corporate communications in different industries, helped working with the senior management team, helping them communicate and lead more effectively particularly in the realm of communications. Then I was working in the construction industry providing similar kinds of services to CEOs of contractors. And then one day one evening a few years ago, as I was sort of contemplating what the next direction might be for my career, it was actually my wife, Matushka Juliana, who's on the call, who suggested, I think you'd make a good coach. And I had coaches throughout my career and loved it. And even as I reflect back on my early family life as a kid, if you ask my brothers, they would tell you that they called me the third parent, because even at that age, I was providing unsolicited advice to my parents about how they could lead our family more effectively and raise my brothers and keep them more in line. They didn't appreciate that coaching gift that I had at that time, but nevertheless, it came to me early. Long story short, and of course now I'm in the diaconate and providing support, of course, to our rector and in that context as well. So in every part of my life, that's been that common thread of helping leaders lead. So it was a natural kind of next manifestation of that to move into coaching a couple of years ago, and I've not looked back since.
Okay, thank you, Deacon Sean. And just to follow up with my own story, my wife and I, following school, we were, get this, Protestant missionaries for 17 years. And so we served on the mission field as a Protestant, and that was a great experience. Didn't leave anything behind when we came to Orthodoxy, but there was a point in time when we felt like we were to return to corporate life and, in a sense, be missionaries behind the glass, not just out on the street. And so we went down that path, had a series of employers that were really instrumental in helping me develop this. But in the end, it was like, okay, God, I was a missionary before. What's my best platform for doing that here? Being led and motivated in the same way. So I knew I could, had several paths, but it became really clear that coaching, and particularly executive coaching, was something that I wanted to pursue. So I did that, started my own coaching business in 2003, and I've had the pleasure of coaching. I think my biggest company was a Fortune 6 company. I mean, it was publicized. McKesson was one of my clients. Other big clients like Hewlett Packard, Cox Enterprises, a lot of financial services firms, CDC, some of those. I really got to connect with people there and learn a lot in the process, and then also have a platform for taking some of the Orthodox and biblical principles into the workplace. And so people make the mistake in thinking like, those are huge assignments and you must be some super guy, but the way I always have described this is like, my experience is this. I'm like the mouse on the back of an elephant, right? I get a great view of the jungle, but it's not because of my own size or stature. But it's nice to ride the backs of people that have been in those kinds of positions and learn from all of these people as a kind of a clearinghouse of what to do, what not to do, and how to coach them through those things, and then hopefully bring some of those experiences back to the Orthodox Church. So there you have it. You have a little bit of info on us, and we'd really like to transition now into just answering any questions you may have in the spirit of a panel discussion. And if you have a question you want to ask, all you got to do is chat that question using the Zoom chat to Holly and fire away.
We do have a question here from Dr. Jonathan Sauer. He asks, how do you suggest infusing Orthodox principles in a secular setting without mentioning Christianity?
I can take a shot at that one first if you want. For those of you that are familiar with Father Stephen Freeman, I remember that my son made a post on one of his devotions one time, and my son, who's a very strong Orthodox Christian, was complaining like, hey, we're not being explicit in everything that we're saying right here. And his answer to my son, which I thought was so funny, was like, they'll connect the dots. Okay. And so, for example, when we're teaching middle way principles, and I had somebody say, well, where did you get this stuff? And it's like, well, I went back and studied these things in church history and, history past, and they're just good principles that help human beings. So there's a lot of questions that come out of those times, but also it's the idea of praxis, right? You have theoria and you have praxis. And basically what we're doing is we're putting a praxis model in there where we're providing a framework for people to practice this type of behavior and faith. And believe me, there have been a number of people that have connected the dots. And whenever questions are asked, of course, we're not bashful about sharing them. So that's my piece. Maybe Deacon Sean or Father Paul, you could add to that.
Well, I love the question. I'm actually curious, and maybe I just invite y'all to type in the chat box in response to Dr. Sauer's question. What is an example of an Orthodox principle that comes to mind for you? Just because you are all Orthodox, or maybe probably most of you are, if not all of you. So I'm just curious, like what is your understanding of what is a distinctly Orthodox principle that sets us apart? How do you like that? The coach asks the question.
Yeah. See, I told you he was good. Forgiveness.
Yeah. So Father Paul says, I see a relationship between the coaching saying the coach the person, not the problem, to something like coach the image, not the sinner. Okay, that's really cool. So Dr. Sauer answered my question with humility, and I would certainly agree. That's something that's very much emphasized in our tradition, maybe more so than in other traditions. Yeah, and just to respond, further to Dr. Sauer, I think that's the thing that for me personally, really, that I love most about coaching is the extreme humility to which it calls you, like not having any answers. I have written at the bottom of my, the form I use for my coaching sessions, next to nothing, humble yourself to the dust. Just to remind myself to avoid the sin of suggestions. So that's one thing where I think that the practice of coaching is very integrated with that very Orthodox emphasis on humility. James says the nature of the soul and mind in contrast to secular theories. James, I might have to ask you to unpack that one for us. Yeah, okay, obedience came up later on. Both Holly and Karen mentioned obedience. And that is, we could really go deep on that one. I don't know where we want to go with this. Let me ask Dr. Sauer, tell us a little bit about what you might want more, what more you might want out of this question you asked.
I am a high school teacher. Okay, the doctor at the beginning of this is a doctor in mathematics, not a physician. And in the church setting, I'm actually a deacon. So take your pick, whichever one you want to call me. But trying in that high school setting, in that public school setting, to try and teach morals without teaching morals, to guide the kids without explicitly saying, look, this is the best guidance I know. That it's an amazing balancing act between those two. And so that's where the root of the question is coming from.
Yeah. Thank you for that context. That's so helpful to know kind of where you're coming from and, you know, where you're working on a regular basis. I too used to be a high school teacher. I taught high school English before I went to seminary. So we have that in common.
Have you created all the essays yet, or are they still sitting on your desk?
There's a certain level at which when you set some things behind you, you go forward. Well, yeah, thank you for that. And it's an amazing question because, you know, we all live in a world that is, you know, not all Orthodox, and we interface, of course, with lots of different types of people. And I mean, I think that, you know, from my perspective, reflecting theologically, if one of the greatest gifts a coach can give a client is more self-awareness, I think about what that looks like from an Orthodox perspective, maybe coming to self-awareness through repentance, maybe a language that a lot of, you know, your students won't speak. But you have the opportunity to interact with them and to ask them questions from a place of curiosity in a conversation with their teacher who cares for them in a way that is going to really maybe open them up. And we were saying earlier, I was saying earlier that, you know, God's always in the room whenever one of his followers is in the room. And so if you can have those conversations, I think in the presence of God, some really beautiful things will happen. And I think God will take care of infusing an Orthodox, Orthodox grace into that conversation, and that you may not have to worry about that, but you can just focus on being present, asking good questions, and helping your students come to greater self-knowledge. But that's my answer. Deacon Sean, would you add anything?
I think the example of the saints throughout the ages is that it's their lives that is, you know, orthodoxy is life, right? So when you as an Orthodox Christian enter the school, you're bringing orthodoxy into the school. There's no extra thing you have to do. It's now in the school. And so the first order of business, and certainly this is the example I think of the saints, is how is orthodoxy manifest in you, you know? And then if we're doing that right, then the words tend to follow, you know, and that seems to also be the example of the saints, is that it's first their example that is the shift for people.
Yep. I would just add one last thing to that. In coaching, we have this tool we call reframing, right? So all the coaches would know what reframing is. And it's a way just to help a person to see it differently. And so I remember coaching someone who was really angry at another person. And, you know, through the coaching process, we arrived at this place, well, where you're seeing them like a criminal, and therefore you're feeling feelings of judgment towards that person. But if you were to see them as a hospitalized patient, you would have compassion and want to heal them, right? So the change in mindset there was, instead of seeing people like criminals, see them like patients, you know, who have medical needs. And just that reframing, it's kind of like a mini form of metanoia, if you know what I'm saying. If they can see it differently and treat other people differently, well then, in a sense, they're applying some of the principles that we need to learn even as Orthodox Christians.
Sorry, I was just going to say, George has asked a question whether there are any coaches out there whose professional practices are attached to parishes. I'm not aware of any, but this is the right place to ask the question.
I will say that my practice is not attached to the parishes where I serve, but I have thought in advance about this, with regard to potential conflicts of interest. And so I've spent some time thinking about, like, well, what if I had a parishioner approach me and say, hey, Father Paul, I'd love to do some coaching with you. What does that look like? And I do think that merits thinking through those different roles. And to have really, really very good, strong role clarity, and to organize that in such a way that makes most sense. The thought that I haven't settled on this. Okay, so this is like rough draft. You're my sounding board here, but what I thought about is basically thinking about talking to them about what that looks like for them, and then also taking a look at their current relationship with the parish, and therefore with me, and then figuring out what a healthy way forward might look like for them with regard to working with me in that capacity.
Another question, what could coaching help me do that I can't do on my own? And I suppose with this question, we could think in terms of what could coaching help me do as a priest or as a parish leader that I couldn't do on my own?
So I'll jump in. I assume that means what could coaching, as if I was being coached, how could it help? So I think, the way I sort of think of it is, I think Dean mentioned in his slides, further, faster. It's an accelerator for our growth and development as people and as leaders. So it's not so much that, there's no question in my experience that coaching facilitates revelation and discovery and new levels of self-awareness that, they don't call them blocks for a reason, that you can't see through them on your own sometimes. And it sometimes needs that dialogue, that partner to help you unearth those things. But if you want to look at it more simply, sure, maybe you would have gotten to that point at some point, but this allows you to, coaching can enable you to move through that process, that development process, more quickly. And also, I'll just say this, leadership, this is true in corporate leadership, but it is especially true in church leadership, is intensely lonely, as many of us clergy know. And so it's very helpful to have a coach, a partner, a confidant who's got some skin in the game with you, who's journeying with you and collaborating, co-creating your path. And so we need that. We just need that as human beings.
I guess I would add that self-coaching is an art that we should all think about and add to our daily routine, because self-coaching can really help. But I like to use the metaphor of the stage, right? I look at the stage like all of the drama in a stage play happens on the stage. And so life brings with it a lot of drama. So if you have a difficult teenager or difficulty with a peer at work or in your parish, or a boss that's not as kind as you wish they would, we oftentimes get trapped on that stage because we live our life subjectively. We're living it from within ourselves. Coaching is something that helps you to move from the stage to the balcony, to see things more objectively, and to make better decisions as a consequence. It's too easy to get trapped into our humanity, particularly in this fallen world. And it's just another outside resource that we can use. And it's interesting because one of the coaching techniques that I really love as a coach is if somebody's explaining a really difficult situation and I'm the coach, right, listening to this person, oftentimes I'll say, okay, what if I were living your life right now? And the problems I had are the exact same problems that you're describing to me, but you're the coach. What would you tell me? Okay. Whenever I do that, they come up with the best advice. I could never be that good or do that good. But when they hear themselves say it, right, it's like, yeah, I remember coaching one woman where I did that. And she said, see, I didn't need to talk to you to begin with. It was like, what? The bottom line is that when we go from putting ourselves from a subjective place to seeing ourselves more objectively, we come up with better answers, and coaches are great at doing that.
Just one last thought. I mean, there were some great comments written in the chat box in response to this question, which I really loved reading. I mean, let's not forget that, you know, we believe we're made in the image of a Trinitarian God. And so, you know, one Christian is no Christian, you know, like there's things that there's a way that, you know, when you're in a conversation with another person and in a dialogue with another person, that are possible that just aren't possible when we're by ourselves. So to me, that's the real power and beauty of what we do.
John has asked a question. Has anyone offered coaching to parish or ministry leadership, ordained and lay? And if so, what did or does that look like?
I've done that. Do you want to put a plug in for the Doulos program, Holly?
Go ahead and I'll match your plug.
Okay. Okay. So I am one of, as is Father Paul, and I think, and at least one other person on this call, one of the parish leadership coaches that works through the Doulos program of the OCLI, works with parishes to support their parish leadership teams, to support their development in areas of vision and change, team building, stewardship, generosity, developing the next generation of leadership at a variety of different areas of the work of parish leadership teams. And so we have a program that it's actually a year-long program where the coach that is a combination of workshop and coaching, where the coach comes alongside the parish leadership team and help them kind of level up, if I can use that term, and do so from a perspective that is actually quintessentially Orthodox. We can explore that in more detail if people want. But in addition to that, I personally, speaking for myself, I do coach Orthodox clergy as part of my leadership coaching practice. And as I said before, you know, clergy need coaches. We all do, but in my opinion, but both as a thought partner, as someone who creates space for folks to feel like they're heard, and sometimes when you're in the trenches, people just need someone that they trust, who can make space for them and be present with them, and hopefully facilitate some moving forward for them as well.
Thanks, Deacon Sean. I'll put in a plug here too. You know, one of the things that we really thought long and hard about with the Doulos program, each of the modules in intensive servant leadership, it, you know, kind of breaks church operations into stewardship, cultivating vision, working together as a team, thinking about investing in emerging leaders and succession planning, thinking about transparency and managing finances and so forth. So there's several different modules of this program. But the one thing that we felt was really critical as we designed this was that it wasn't just enough to come in with expert content, that what churches really want and need is a way to implement the plan that makes sense from their own local parish context. So I looked intentionally, we looked for coaches, people who know how to ask provocative questions to get a leadership team on the same page, thinking about how do we do this together? What's the plan that makes sense for our parish context? And now how do we implement it so that coach provides some accountability and commitment and, addressing those hurdles along the way as that parish leadership team tries to implement the plan that emerges from that workshop. So that was a big part of, identifying a coaching model in with leadership development, coaching for parishes, for parish leadership teams, for clergy and lay leaders alike. And I can say more about it towards the end as well, but I'd like to come back to some of your questions as well. We have a question here from Bethany. She's asking, how would you suggest handling a conversation with a client where the client is contemplating an action that is clearly sinful? How do we not lead them one way or the other and still be true to ICF, to our own ethics?
I love that question, because this is where I believe, again, the Orthodox Christian coach does such a good job. And when I said before, everybody has a worldview and will come from a worldview. So if you had a coach that was, of a secular mindset, right, they're going to ask questions or maybe communicate a message that would be very different than an Orthodox coach. Because I've had situations like that. And I would ask a question like this. It's like, well, if you took a step like that, what are some of the likely effects or consequences that would come from a decision along those lines? And if you did go down that path, if you were able to see yourself as having done that and gone past that and look back, what do you think your thoughts would be at that point in time? How would you evaluate that transaction when you're on the other side of that transaction? So without judging them, you can try and help them live the experience. And we all know what that's like, right? Eve thought the fruit looked really great until she took a bite, and then all of a sudden they were aware. And if you can help create that thought about what's life like on the other side of this, looking back, and if you were to do that, what would you say was good about that? And what would you say is bad about that? I mean, most people, because human beings have a conscience and they have a way of feeling bad about things that they're doing that they may not personally approve of. But the other thing is, in coaching, we're taught to help a client coach to their values. And so one of the things a coach does is he or she really works hard to learn the values of their client to be able to reflect on those values when they're coaching the client. So giving feedback to a client may sound something like this, where it's like, wow, I get why you'd be interested in doing that, but how does that match up to your value of, fill in the blank, whatever that value is? And really, it's just to help them to think outside of the subjective to get to the objective, and hopefully they'll make a good decision.
That was really good. I don't know if I have much to add to that, except that my thought was to use the opportunity to help them articulate and maybe understand better what is motivating them to take that course, like what they hope to get out of it, or what is the underlying desire there, and just to clarify that, because sometimes that could open up different possibilities. Well, what might be some other ways to get to have that desire met, or to get to that place where you're wanting to go, and to provide them with more options might challenge them in a way without you directly challenging them on the course that they've intended.
I'll just offer one other thought, and that is, as a coach, it's okay not to work with certain clients. And the scenario that, as that particular scenario, I would think of sometimes because coaches are human, it can be a real distraction, especially if we're, still growing and maturing as coaches or whatever. It could be a massive distraction for us to, if there's a significant and overt values conflict with the client that we have, and if we're not able to be fully present and fully and also fully ready to fully engage with the client, regardless of the story they bring into the coaching relationship, then we may not be the right coach for them. And it's okay. It's okay to say, you know what, I don't think I'm the right coach for you. And rather than, guilt ourselves into thinking we're not doing a good enough job, or to think that, or to get ourselves in these sort of intellectual contortions, sometimes it's okay to say, there's somebody else out there for you.
A question that's somewhat similar, Father Paul Hodge asked, when do you move to a referral to a different type of professional? When you realize, you don't need a coach?
Either of you guys want to take that one, or I can jump into.
Go ahead, Dean.
Let me give you an example of that. I had a client one time that was referred to me. He had a business, wasn't going so well, and he wanted a coach to help him with his business issues. And so we started down this path, and, coaching match, which is what Deacon Sean was discussing, is so important at a time like this. But what I found out later is that he was actually going through a pretty intense psychotherapy with a psychiatrist. And it was interesting because I would give him simple field assignments and he just couldn't do them. And by field work, you have to understand in coaching, that's just a grown-up word for homework. And they were very simple things. And, I would say, well, what's preventing you from doing this? And he kind of disclosed his relationship. I mean, he was going through all kinds of therapies for multiple issues. And I basically said, really, I'm not sure that coaching's the right thing for you. It seems that counseling would be better. I have another client that was a business owner again. And when we got into the coaching process, he just couldn't get past some of the things that we were talking about. And it became clear to me that, again, this person wasn't really a coaching candidate. He was more a counseling candidate. And thankfully, we know some really good Orthodox counselors in our area as well, and we were able to redirect them. So one of the no-nos of a coach is to move out of coaching and into some other discipline. So coaches are never to be counselors. So we're taught in coach training school never to go down that path and create referrals when needed.
I just add one thought to that. It is, I do coach folks who are doing both, who have a coach, maybe for a career coaching for, they're looking to develop certain leadership skills. And they acknowledge to me as part of the onboarding process that they also have a counselor because they're working with, or they have a psychotherapist that they're working with specific issues with. As my sense is, as long as there's real clarity about the distinctives of those two roles and what the purpose of the coaching engagement is for. In this case, it's working on specific leadership, practical leadership skills, or ways to for example, be a more effective people manager. It's not to go down the path of some of the deeper stuff that you're wrestling with through the counseling. As long as there's that distinction, these two things can coexist. But I think, as Dean was alluding to, it's the blurring of the lines where it gets really problematic.
Father Paul has another question here. Do you ever get permission from a client to work with another professional in tandem? Father Paul, maybe just clarify, do you mean another professional coach? So somebody's working with two coaches at the same time?
No, I mean, there are occasions in the priesthood where someone has a psychotherapist, and with their permission, you can have a conversation between one professional and another so that both can do their jobs better and the client/patient can benefit more.
So in coaching, we have a very strict rule of confidentiality. And so we have to always guard confidentiality. However, with the client's permission, we could do that. I mean, this has happened very rarely with me, but I've had a client or two that had a counselor that I knew, and I was their coach, similar to what Deacon Sean was describing. And they asked us to talk and collaborate just so that we could exchange information. But that never gave us permission to span our own discipline, if you will, So the counselor wasn't trying to be the coach and I wasn't trying to be a counselor, but it is true that there was some effective interchange when that happened. I have to say, all of my years of coaching, I haven't done it that much, but certainly at the request of a client, as long as all the confidentialities are there, we have it in writing, it's very clear, then we could do that for sure.
How do you deal with clients who really are kind of at an impasse and they kind of throw their hands up and I just don't know what to do. I really need some advice here. I don't know what to do. And just, you've been through this before. I'd really like to hear your advice.
Sounds like a question for Father Paul.
Dean, how did I know that you were going to do that?
Because I'm a tormentor.
Yes, you are the greatest tormentor, quote, coach, and I love that little joke. This is actually something that Dean coached me on, because sometimes, a client will come to us with, like just a genuine need, and one thing another thing that that Dean has taught me is that it's okay to offer a thought, as long as that's outside of the the realm of coaching, as long as we're very conscious of what we're doing. And Dean taught me a little phrase of like, okay, I'll take my coaching hat off right now, right? And I'm thinking about a client of mine who was just needed the kind of affirmation of just another human at some point in one of our calls, and it was just honestly asking me what I thought. And I said, all right, let me take my coaching hat off and just be Paul, and tell you that, etc. I can't remember what the circumstance is. And, just asked her if she had any thoughts in response to that. And I said, all right, well, I'll put my coaching hat back on now. And I think that, recognizing the humanity of ourselves and of the people with whom we work, but in a very conscious way, where we're highly aware of what we're doing. I think that's pretty much everything. Dean, what would you say that I left anything out there?
No, I mean, I think what you said is perfect. That's great.
I'm even asking now as someone in my role, where I think sometimes we have parish leadership teams and clergy who really just like, you're the expert. Tell me how I'm supposed to lead this parish council. Tell me how I'm supposed to put a stewardship plan together, and they want to like sit back kind of more in a passive role and have an expert kind of lay out the plan. And I think a lot of times implement it and do the work of implementation on their own too. So say a little bit, what is the value of having people kind of own the work and articulate the plan from their own thoughts and hearts?
Well, again, remember the old saying, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. I think that principle comes to play. I mean, there are certain cases where people need management consulting or consulting help. But if people are, in a sense, trying to take a back seat when it may be their responsibility to step up to the plate, this is where the coach would hopefully do a really good job of asking the question, right? Like, well, what is it that prevents you? Is there anything about this task that is off-putting to you? And if so, can you explain what that is, right? Or look, I could give you my thinking from my perspective, but I'm on the outside, you're on the inside. Whose thinking do you think would work best in a situation like this? Mine or yours? And can we, before we go down that path, can we take a minute to explore your thinking first to see what you have to say, to see if that is something that you're interested in? And if somehow we get stuck, fine, I'm happy to give my opinion if I can take off my coach's hat, but why don't we use the resources that you have for now, and we'll save my stuff, which is second place here toward the end. So I think I'd really want to use an affirmation process to affirm them for their insight, to affirm them for their position, to affirm them for, hey, you have something to give this world too. So let's see what you have first. And I think I would want to try and help coach them down that path of displaying their own thinking, right? Because again, coaches aren't there to tell people what to do. If this is a coaching relationship, you want to help them to do it, right? So I remember I toured in the military one time with a military chaplain, and they would have conversations like this, right? They'd say, well, if you want somebody to go out on the range and learn how to shoot their gun, bottom line is you as the coach have to keep your finger off their trigger. You have to let them put their own fingers on the trigger. So it's with that in mind that we would want to really pull it out of them versus just giving them answers.
I would just add to that marvelous comment that a lot of times, in addition to saying, what Dean just said, I will also just speak very truly about myself. And I say, like, there is no way I can know your situation better than you do. There's no way I can know your context better than you do. And there's no way I can know you better than you do. And, while that is, you're using I statements, which is like generally a no-no for a coach, it's a way of trying to minimize ourselves back to that place of being a mirror and disappearing as much as we can in the conversation.
And can I add one thing to that? And this is why we speak about coaching being a profession and how you have to go against the grain of normal human behavior in order to do it right. When you're asked a question in your area of knowledge, or you're asked a question that like, hey, I don't know, and people put themselves in the place of the learner and they want to go to the great person to get the answer, what's the normal human urge? It's to answer the question. And we were taught that growing up, right? Our moms and dads said, hey, if an adult comes and asks you a question, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to answer them because that's being respectful. But that's not what coaches do. We have to learn to respond to questions with questions. And where's the greatest example of that? I read a book one time, and I don't know if these numbers are accurate or not, but somebody who wrote this book counted how many questions Jesus was asked in the 4 Gospels. And it was something like, it was either 183 or 187. It was somewhere in that range. And then the writer said, how many of those questions do you think Jesus actually answered? And it was just a handful. But in return, he asked 307 questions. So you didn't usually get a Q&A session with Jesus. You got a Q&Q session with him, right? Should we pay taxes or not? Like, well, whose inscription's on the coin? So all we're saying is this again highlights the idea that coaching is a profession. It requires professional skills, and just wanted to highlight that fact with that question. Thanks, Holly. That was a great setup.
And I love what Karen says here. She says the changes that come from coaching are more profound than if the answer is handed to me. So thanks, Karen, for that thought too. Maybe one last question before we kind of wrap up for tonight. And I'd like to share some thoughts and ideas for all of us here, especially those who are looking at working as coaches professionally. Perhaps one last question might be around, what do clients say after a year or two of coaching? Like, what is it that they're able to do or think or achieve or, do more efficiently that they weren't able to do a year or two ago?
I imagine the answer to that is going to be different for every coach based on what they specialize in and the focus of the work. But so first of all, for me, most of my clients, I do have some that I've worked for multiple years, but a lot of them I work sort of between 3 and 12 months, or 3, 6, 8 months or so. And I would say most, the first thing that definitely I hear from clients is there's a level of self-awareness that comes, a level of connection to, Dean mentioned it earlier, to values, and an empowerment of actually using that connection to those values, that connection to kind of who they really are, to actually problem solve for themselves. So there, in my experience, what often happens, the change that happens in clients that I work with is they learn to identify and then take their values and use them as tools to problem solve for themselves in whatever the context happens to be, whether that's in a parish leadership context or in a corporate context. So that's what, if you went onto my website, that's what you'd see most people were talking about when they say those are the outcomes they experience through coaching.
I'll just jump in that, like I just went through my own website while while Deacon Sean was speaking, and probably the most common benefit that my clients talk about is clarity. Just that it's just invaluable for them because they can just see things more clearly after we're finished talking. And I mean, I'm blessed with some pretty amazing clients who are real go-getters and just really amazing action-oriented people, and they just run with it. And so, but they run with it with more clarity. So that would probably be my main benefit that my clients experience.
And I thought of two quick stories. I had one client, I knew her husband really well. He was like my first client and was trying to start a nonprofit. So I helped him with that. But as we got down the line, he asked me to coach his wife. I said, well, what's the deal? And she's a portrait artist, right? And he said, she is plagued with fear. She can't market. She can't do it. She's a really good person, but she just can't do it. And I told him, that sounds like a counseling thing. I don't think I can do that. And he said, no, I want you to coach her anyway. Just stick to coaching principles. Okay. I remember asking her the question. It's like, what would you like to see happen? Her answer was, I'd like to be known as the premier portrait artist in the Southeast. And so we went through this whole thing, how to deal with fear, how to get past the barriers. Let's just apply some praxis. Wouldn't you know it? She ended up getting a presidential portraiture. And so I got to go at the debut and meet Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, in Plains, Georgia, because she ended up doing their portraiture and it was hung in there. Another client, it was another female client of mine that had a staff position at another nonprofit. And she's just burgeoning with these good leadership and management skills and was just really low in self-confidence. I remember saying to her, it's like, you should really be like the executive director of a ministry like this someday. Couldn't believe it. Well, 3 months ago, she got the job. She's the executive director of a multi-million-dollar nonprofit here in Atlanta that has an outreach to refugees. So, sometimes people just need partnering. And it's not the coach that gets the credit, okay? Because it's like my wife says to me, it's like the only reason you can be a coach is because you don't have to know anything. You can just ask questions, She keeps me humble, right? But it's not the coach, it's the client that does the heavy lifting. So if they're willing to engage in a relationship like that and engage in the heavy lifting, the bottom line is they can go much farther, much faster, and achieve things that they never thought they could do.
Thanks, Dean. If you wouldn't mind, Dean, answering this question from Father Nicholas, clergy coaching, which is not very common in the Orthodox world, what can we learn or know from clergy coaching from other Christian faiths?
Okay. So you knew that I was a Protestant missionary for a long time, so I was deeply embedded in Protestant churches. And to be honest with you, I still coach 2 Protestant pastors. I think when people figure out what that coaching relationship really is, it's not a coaching relationship of a superior or an inferior. It's just a peer, somebody that's coming alongside. And I've coached a handful of priests as well and found those relationships to be so amazing. And because oftentimes I think priest's job is a lonely job, and just having safe space to process and troubleshoot concerns that they may have without telling them what to do or giving them any answers. I just think it needs to catch on more. The more people understand the coaching relationship, what happens inside that coaching relationship, the more appealing it becomes. Again, you can be a great athlete, but great athletes don't discharge coaches. They don't get to a place where they don't need a coach anymore. Every professional athlete uses a coach. So I think the more we create awareness and understanding of that relationship, probably the more appealing it'll be to the Orthodox community.
So thank you so much, all of you, for attending tonight. I want to just leave a few thoughts about what we're hoping to do with this Orthodox Coaching Network, and just leave a little bit of time if anybody has a follow-up question. I think we have a lot of opportunities. One is to provide a network for you all to connect with other like-minded coaches. Wouldn't it be nice if you could come to a mastermind group or some sort of network group and, maybe on a monthly basis or something like that, to just interact with each other, support each other in your businesses. There's all sorts of thinking around that too. We're also starting to think a little bit about what would it look like to provide some certification through the Orthodox Christian Leadership Initiative with some training programs. So we're starting to have some conversations around that as well, which is very exciting. We also really want to be the place to connect potential clients who are seeking professional coaching services from an Orthodox coaching network. I know that we have a lot of counselors and therapists who are Orthodox, and their network is going pretty strong. We have like Orthodox attorneys, we have a group of like Orthodox architects, and wouldn't it be nice if people are looking for a leadership development coach or vocational coach to actually find, somebody who shares the same faith and find an Orthodox coaching professional. We also are hoping to cultivate independent contractor partners for our organization to serve as parish health coaches for our doulos programs, to serve as facilitators for our peer learning programs, where we gather clergy groups together, where we gather parish council president groups together, or parish council treasurers or church steward groups together, and have those coaches who are so good at facilitation and asking questions kind of lead those peer learning groups. And then also just, to be there for one-on-one coaching. We are starting to list some of you as professional Orthodox coaches and list you on our site so that we can get people connected to you. We also want to provide Orthodox professional coaches the opportunities to offer their coaching services to other Orthodox Christians and parish leaders as a mutually enriching exchange and blessing within the body of Christ. I think we will have better parish councils if we work with professional coaches who can help us think better and think smarter and just do the good job of leading well. We also want to cultivate a culture of coaching practice in the Orthodox Church. As Father Nicholas said, it's not very common. It's really an untapped kind of practice. And I think that we recognize that many of our clergy and lay parish leaders would really benefit significantly through coaching services, and by extension, the parishes and communities that they serve and lead. So that's really the thinking that's going behind this coaching network. And I know that some of you are here today just, totally new to the whole coaching concept, but a lot of you have done a little bit of digging already, and you're actually intrigued with this as a profession. So I'd like to just have this time be open for just a couple of quick questions around any of those things in terms of connecting coaches with our clergy and other lay parish leaders or parish leadership teams.
Holly, maybe I'll just make a quick comment just to put a finer point on one of the things you mentioned. We do have, while we don't have yet what I would call a formal mastermind group, we do have an informal group of coaches that is growing, that meets monthly for about an hour. And currently we're kind of zeroing in at the moment on questions and discussion around growing our coaching practices and how but the themes that we get into vary from session to session. We'll probably over the next couple of sessions look at that particular vein, but just an invitation for any currently coaching coaches out there that we'd love to have you be a part of that discussion group as well. And so maybe if Holly, if they reach out to you and want to connect either with myself or Father Paul Hodge, that would be great.
Yeah, so if any of you are interested in meeting monthly with other professional coaches who are Orthodox, yeah, Father Paul Hodge put his email in there, or I'm happy to relay that and get you all connected. I would just like to share a vision with you as well. I'm working with our development director, and I think it would be wonderful if we could offer professional coaching to every newly ordained priest. So my goal is to start working with some of our bishops and seminaries and to really think about what would that look like and what would the change be? How can we set up our priests for success by giving them professional coaching services so that they can balance work and life, so that they can deal with unruly parish councils or deal with the conflict that happens from time to time. What would that look like if we really could provide some intentional coaching services for our newly ordained priests?
Ollie, can I ask our, everyone, for a little bit of a blessing from you, if you don't mind? One of my favorite things to ask at the end of a coaching session is what were everyone's takeaways. And like, while this has been an informational meeting, I would love to hear what stood out to you. Maybe if you write in the chat box or something like that, if you have any, anything that really stood out to you from our, conversation today, that'd be really a blessing to hear that. So if you have the time, I'd love to hear that.
This is at a high level, so I'm not responding to Dean, Father Paul, or Father Deacon Sean. My initial takeaway is the excitement I have in seeing new faces and the expanded interest in coaching in an Orthodox context. So I'm excited by that. And of course, there's a lot of good stuff I got. Thank you for your answers to my questions. Thank you.
Glory to God. Karen.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I was interested in coaching before I knew that there was an Orthodox coaching. There's energy around that, right? And so to find, for me to see these things, these two interests or loves come together is pretty exciting. I just am amazed at the power of the coaching relationship to bring insight, clarity, transformation. And I think there's a need, and so I'd love to figure out how to serve in that way as I get started. I'm not there yet. I'm almost there to launching the business.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Dr. Sauer. Just general encouragement as I look to start coaching in addition to teaching. Nayad, thank you. The power of coaching to bring positive change in the Orthodox context. Very impressive. Thank you for that. From Bethany, it's interesting to think the fact that Jesus used questions to respond to people a lot of the time, and even in the Garden of Eden. Thanks for that insight. Love that. Dr. Karanides.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, everybody. And very excited to be here. I just had a fantastic night absorbing and listening to all this. And one of the things that comes to mind for me is the varied examples that were given tonight and thinking about how to build on some thought leadership around this in terms of being able to codify and share this in some sort of a formal journal, or ultimately a peer-reviewed journal that provides some more awareness to individuals to understand either how to, could create some self-awareness that they need help, right? Or to provide a peer coach some guidance in terms of dealing with some new situations that they haven't dealt with before. So I do think there's tremendous opportunity to just leverage all the stories and examples and skills that are here, let alone beyond this Zoom call, and codify it a little. But thank you. Yeah, it's exciting.
Just echo that, Dr. Taranidis, with the hope to develop like an Orthodox community of practice, something that could be a specific subset of like the International Coaching Federation. That's kind of a vision of mine. I'd like to see that someday.
Yeah, agreed, exactly.
And just so you know, we have actually created an arrangement with another Christian coaching training school that's ICF certified, that's really interested in helping us launch an Orthodox program for coaching as well.
Who is that?
PCCI.
I'm training with them right now.
Yeah, Chris McCluskey is a longtime friend of mine, and we kind of grew up early in the days of kind of ancient old coaching way back when, and he's a fantastic Christian brother that has, the wherewithal to be able to help the Orthodox community.
Wonderful.
So exciting. Thanks.
Well, thank you all for your time. Thanks for being here tonight. Special thank you to Dean and Deacon Sean and Father Paul for sharing the panel discussion and all of your questions and insightful answers. This is really exciting to be a part of something kind of new and just beginning to emerge within the Orthodox context here in America. If anybody has any questions or ideas or wants to get connected, feel free to reach out to me, Holly Benton at orthodoxservantleaders.com. And with that, Dean, I'll give you the last word, and then we'll ask Father Paul to take us out with the prayer.
Just really appreciate you attending with us here tonight. It just feels like family in a way, all aligned around the same idea, and who knows what God can do with this. So thank you so much for your time, your interest, and your energy. We really appreciate it.
All right. Well, let's pray. O Christ, our God, you are the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. You have fulfilled all the divine plan of the Father. Fill our hearts with joy and gladness always, now and forever, into the ages of ages. Amen. Good to see all of you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Good night.